Welcome everyone to the BusinesKey Podcast with Ochiko and Debbie. Today we'll look at discussing Pret Manger's decision to scrap drinks, and secondly, struggles on the current rental market. Over to you, Debbie.
Yeah, so to start off with the Pret Manger story, in 2020, of course, as we all know, we were going through the global pandemic. We were under a stay-at-home order or guidance from the government. And as you can imagine, many retailers saw an impact to their business as a result of consumers changing their habits, not being out in public as much, working from home more. And I would imagine that hit the coffee shops a great deal, because whereas people would perhaps on their way into the office in the morning would grab a coffee, or and at their lunchtime or what have you, instead they were at home. And so in 2020, I guess as a way to drum up business, Pret Manger launched a subscription service where I think at the time it was for £20 a month, you could get unlimited drinks. And their range of drinks included teas, coffees, and also smoothies, frappuccinos, and milkshakes. I think currently at the moment, I think the subscription has been updated to where it's now £25 a month. It still includes that full list of drinks plus things like syrups and extra shots of coffee. But I think you can now only get 5 cups of coffee a day, and there needs to be at least half an hour in between. So that was the subscription service, which I think when we were initially discussing this behind the scenes, I think Ochiko, you were saying that surely I've got the subscription model wrong, because it sounded too good to be true. £25 a month for 5 drinks a day, 3 drinks a day, with a half an hour gap in between. But I think, am I right in saying that you thought surely we've read that wrong?
Yeah, I was thinking of the profitability. I was thinking surely that doesn't make sense if you're giving people the option of having 5 drinks a day, and I'm thinking of some people at work, they have at least two drinks, two to 3 coffees a day.
That's true. So
I was thinking, okay, I can imagine that times that by 5 days. I was thinking, wow, surely they're making a loss on that. But actually, when we looked at it, I think it kind of makes sense. I think when we thought about it a bit further, we could see that actually that it's probably sort of similar to a loss leader, isn't it? So I imagine, although their clients get to have 5 drinks, they get to stay. They'll probably sit in there for quite a long time, so they're likely to get food with their order, isn't it? So yeah, that's what we're thinking. So that way they'll be able to, maybe there might be a high markup on the food, perhaps. So then they'll be able to make the money back that way.
Yeah, so a loss leader in the sense that they're not making money on these drinks via the subscription service per se. However, if you're getting a free drink, you might be inclined to, get a snack, get some of the baked goods that are at the front of the store. You might pick up, a salad or a sandwich, and like you said, Ochiko, they probably marked up the cost on those items. Also, I think they probably took a punt that the likelihood of every single customer that picks up this subscription service actually takes up the 5 drinks every single day is probably minimal. I think, most Pret Mangers, if I'm correct in saying, are probably, maybe in city centres or close to office buildings. And I think as a result, most people probably would take advantage of this when they would be in the office. And as we know, most people are still at the most, I guess, working under a hybrid model. If you can, of course, there are some jobs where you can't work from home, but where you can, I would assume that a lot of people are not going into the office 5 days a week. So they are still generating some revenue from this service, which is the guaranteed £25 each month. And yes, as you said, hopefully it's a loss leader, so people will come into the stores. And I think we also discussed, there is a lot of competition when it comes to these coffee shops. If you know though that you have this subscription service where you can get a free drink, rather than going to, a Starbucks or a Costa. I probably would be more inclined to walk past those shops, even if I had to walk a little bit further and go to a Pret, because I'm getting a free drink. So you're also instilling sort of brand loyalty into customers. And we thought, if you go to certain supermarkets and grocers, you can see branded coffee. Some of the coffee shops have gone into creating their own, coffee products and for sale. I'm not sure if Pret currently does that. If they do, this is probably a way to sort of increase that visibility for customers, where they already have the loyalty with their drinks, and therefore they're more likely to buy their products. And if they don't currently do that, it sort of is an incentive for them to sort of launch into that market and be more of a household brand than perhaps they were originally.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. The other thing I was thinking of whilst you were speaking was perhaps maybe as well, let's say there was Pret across the road and there was maybe Costa in front of you. Maybe, on a normal day, maybe, some of the customers might just think, let me just pop into Costa and get my hot chocolate or get my, cappuccino or whatever, because it's closer, it's more convenient. But as with this, as some customers will have this loyalty, will be on this loyalty scheme now. They're incentivized to make that journey across the road, because now, you're going to save some money. So it makes sense. But I think the other thing as well, also is thinking about it as well, is I suppose if some of the customers also have friends or colleagues with them as well, it will also drive traffic, as they'll probably tell them about it. So also, driving that, so probably free advertising in that way. Yeah. But then also just the fact that, let's say, just back to that Costa example, if I'm going to Pret, then it's likely my friend is coming with me to Pret. So I'm also bringing more customers to Pret as well. So I suppose it's that free marketing. Also, it's quite clever when you think about it.
That's a really good point, because if I with a colleague or with a friend and we want to go for a coffee and I know that I can get a free one, I'm definitely going to encourage my friend, let's go to the Pret, even if the other coffee shop is closer. No, let's go to the Pret because I could get a free drink. So I definitely think you're right there. So I think although initially when we were thinking about the loyalty scheme, we thought, is this making sense from a profitability standpoint? When we sort of delved into a few of the sort of potential upsides, we sort of thought, we could see it perhaps making sense. But this then leads to this article that you saw in BBC News, which you teased at the beginning, which is about Pret announcing they're actually going to scrap the sale of smoothies, milkshakes and frappes from their menu. And it was quite interesting because the BBC actually did an expose of sorts, where they found that a lot of customers who are on this subscription service were actually complaining, because whereas the hot drinks plus the colder drinks were supposed to be available on this scheme, a lot of customers were finding that when they were going into Pret stores, they were being told that it was unavailable. And when the BBC actually did a survey of some staff at Pret, they admitted that a lot of the times it took a long time to actually make the drinks. There would be long queues and they would feel under pressure to, serve all the customers. So instead they would say things like, the machine is broken. There wasn't an order, so they don't have enough stock, or that they don't sell the item in their store, whereas they did, and they just did not want to make it. I think also what Pret found was that these sort of the fraps, the milkshakes, the smoothies, they actually have a slightly higher margin than the coffees and the teas, and therefore I guess perhaps when doing the costings they found that if they are selling a lot of, or not selling because it's free under the subscription service, if there is a lot of requests for these items, then perhaps the business isn't making as much money as they thought from this model. I also had the thought that with something like a coffee, it's probably something that you'd want in the morning, maybe just after lunch perhaps. It's probably geared around work. Not to say that people don't drink coffee outside of work, but you can imagine it as, being a very much probably higher sales when, lots of customers are going into the office or going into their place of work. Yeah. Whereas something like a smoothie or a frappe, you can get that anytime. If I'm going shopping, let me go and grab a fruit drink. And therefore, I can imagine perhaps in the weekends or outside of, business hours, they were probably having to make a lot more of these drinks than perhaps they had originally anticipated. And Pret announced that they're actually going to scrap these drinks from their menu entirely. And I think they've said they're going to replace it with an iced, some iced drinks in the summer, which is, sort of their rationale for scrapping it. But
to be fair, I think the iced fraps have been super popular. So, perhaps they're keeping with the times in some ways. But yeah, I think, certainly that would probably be a blow for some of the customers that really enjoyed their smoothies and so on. But for Pret, I think, like you said, it since they took a long time to make and the margins on it is probably not as big. It's probably not as big as the making a coffee or making a tea, etc. So yeah, that's probably it makes sense for them to stop doing it. But it's interesting as well, the point that you were making as well, that actually it probably tends to be the people that are sitting there for quite a long time, which are the customers they're not making as much money from. The subscription customers, they're probably the people that are more likely to. So the people that are in there for longer are probably people that are more likely to order the fraps. And I suppose it's the customers that are coming in that are maybe in a rush, who are probably more likely to be the
paying customers.
The quote unquote paid. I suppose the subscription are paid too, but
true, yeah.
I suppose on a daily, if you think about it on a daily basis,
on a per drink basis,
per drink basis, the so-called paying customers, they're more likely to get, like you said, tea or coffee, which is a quicker transaction. So I suppose, for them, they want to prioritize the quick transactions, or want to make sure that it's a smooth process to save costs. Yeah,
I think a smooth process and to try to keep the customers happy in store. But I think there are some lessons that possibly could be taken away from this. I think one, good to think outside the box. So I think the subscription service, many retailers are sort of either already have pre-existing loyalty schemes, loyalty cards, or are developing them, and they can be beneficial, from a perspective of, understanding customer data, customer habits, and what you can do with that data. Also advertising directly to the customer, like you said, encouraging loyalty, so the customer continues to shop at that location because they have a scheme there where either they're getting points, or in this case they're getting free drinks. There's a benefit to the customer. However, there also has to be a balance with regards to what you communicate to the customer with regards to what they're getting for this service. So I think Pret sort of starting off by saying everything on the menu is part of this service. As a customer, I would expect everything on the menu is part of the service. If they had started the service and said this only includes teas, coffees, where you can get extra shots of caffeine, you can get extra shots of syrup, I think there still would have been an uptake for this. And I think, and hot chocolate as well, I think there still would have been an uptake, and it probably would have been popular, but they wouldn't have this level of complaints. It's because they had these lofty expectations of, whatever you like, so to speak, with regards from a drinks perspective, pretty much is on offer. But then the reality was, it wasn't. That, you got the complaints from customers, you get the negative PR, where you can imagine some people out of frustration would say, I'm not shopping here again, I'm going to a different retailer, you've lied to me, I felt misled, etc., etc. So there is sort of this negative payoff then where, you've offered the service that you have not been able to commit to. Whereas, as we said earlier, Pret started the scheme, it was unlimited and it was £20 a month. Then they changed it to, 5 drinks in a day for £25 a month. Perhaps they should have, maybe at an earlier point, before these complaints came in, rethought about, what they were offering, rather than, as some customers think, being hoodwinked. The customers, some customers, perceive it in that way. Whereas, it was still being advertised as all of these drinks were available. But in their experiences, for many customers, that wasn't the case. So I guess there's a lesson there in sort of managing expectations, what you're advertising to customers, and sort of constantly reviewing this as well. It's not just sort of thinking we've got a great product, we've got a great idea, that's fine. But actually, even speaking to your barista, speaking to your the people that work, or like you said, many of them probably they don't want to make these drinks as part of the subscription service because of the length of time it takes and the disgruntled customers. So having that dialogue, with the people that your employees, and also monitoring your communication, I think is really pivotal in business to ensure that you're, continuing to deliver a good, service and offering to your customers, and that you reduce the amount of complaints and negative publicity.
That's a very good point you're making there. So effectively what you're saying is you're talking about, when we're trying to create a new product or a new an extra product in business, really gathering feedback from the people that are doing the day-to-day, that are in the trenches, so to speak, to really be able to tailor the offering and make it even better. So that really makes sense. But at the same time, it's maybe in some ways it's good that they listen to the no doubt complaints from the baristas and so on. And now they've decided to improve their offer. So.
That's all the negative publicity from the BBC.
Yeah, plus the negative publicity. So interesting stuff there. And is there any other points you wanted to make on the story? Or?
No, just if you have any thoughts to this, if you have any comments, if you're part of the subscription service, let us know your thoughts. How have you found it? Have you found yourself sort of making additional purchases of food and snacks? Have you found yourself bringing friends along to Pret? Staying in Prets for longer? Let us know your thoughts. Yeah, so this brings us nicely onto the second topic that we wanted to discuss. So I think, Achuka, you mentioned that you saw an article about the rental market. If you could just summarize what you read for us, and then we can delve into our topic.
Yeah, so effectively it was a BBC journalist, and she was living in a rental accommodation in a one bedroom flat in London. And she described it as a shoebox sized flat, so you can imagine it would be very, very small. And what she said was that a landlord had recently increased the rents by about 30%. I'm sure many of us can relate, as during the housing crisis, there's quite a lot of people that have had their rents also increased as well by quite a large amount. So she was saying that what she decided to do was to have a look around to see if she could find basically a cheaper house to rent. So she went to about 20 to 30 properties, and what she saw was that a lot of the prices were quite similar. So it was around I think it was around 1,650 was the rental price. So a lot of the houses that she was seeing was for rent, or flats for rent, were similar price. So she was really, really struggling to find a rental property. And there were, from what she was saying, there was a lot of people coming to some of the viewings as well. So she can really see that a lot of people were in a similar place, really struggling with the rental amounts and really struggling to find alternatives as well. So it really just made me think that actually, how, in terms of the rental market, rent versus buy, is buying better than renting? Is renting better than buying? What are your thoughts, Debbie?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And as you mentioned, right now in the UK, we have a cost of living crisis, and as a result, it has affected many different aspects of life, really. So from rentals, from rent cost to the cost of groceries, to the cost of energy, and just living in general. There has been incredible impacts as a result. And as you were saying, it must be very distressing for a lot of people out there who are trying to rent. And I think one potential negative with regards to renting is the short-term nature of it. So tenants tend to sign, I think, 1 year tenancy agreements, maybe 2 years in some cases, which creates a level of instability because after that rental period elapses, as what happened to this journalist, your rent can be increased, and it can increase at a rate higher than your wages have increased, or greater than what other income you have left over, and therefore it might mean you're displaced because you can't afford that property anymore. Whereas arguably with purchasing a home, you have you possibly might have a mortgage which might have a bit more of a fixed term in nature, not always, but it can be. And therefore you might have a little bit more certainty with regards to, you know, the amount of money that you might be paying for your mortgage. Also that this is your home, you know, this is your place to stay. You know, I've heard of some people remortgaging their properties from, let's say, a 25-year mortgage to a 40-year mortgage, which, you know, essentially means that they can keep their mortgage costs at a relatively low level, although in the long run they'll end up paying more, arguably, but it means that they can stay in their property. So I think that's one aspect, you know, from that stability perspective, you know, buying might be more beneficial than renting.
That makes sense. I suppose the other thing is, like you said, the deposit, you know, is just quite a stumbling block. It can be quite high. And of course, with the super high interest rates at the moment, how much are we talking? Is it 4%, 5%, around 4-5% at the moment?
Yeah, it's quite high.
Yeah, Bank of England interest rate. So yeah, in the UK, it's super expensive at the moment. But yeah, like you said, although yes, the actual rent might be comparable to what people are paying for mortgage, but I suppose when you consider the extra costs, like things becoming damaged, the roof getting damaged, you know, or, you know, worst case scenario, the roof getting damaged, or the, you know, boiler breaking down as worst case scenario, you know, that will fall on the buyer's lap, so to speak. So they also have, you know, the increased responsibility, the maintenance cost that comes with owning a property. So it's not completely like for like. And
yeah. No, that's a very fair point. So if you're renting, typically, you know, the outlay, it might be the first month's rent, it might be a damage deposit, and that's about it. You just pay your rent each month. If there's an issue, you call the landlord. The landlord should repair the issue, or, you know, seek reconciliation with the issue, and that's that. You just pay your rent and you go on your way. If you buy a property, although, you know, yes, as we mentioned, you might be able to stay in a property for longer, but you also, in most cases, have to put down quite a hefty deposit, which, you know, in some cases can wipe out someone's, you know, savings. You may want to renovate the property when you move in. You may have to buy new furniture when you move in. Depending on the type of property, you might have, you know, service charges, ground rent charges, you know, plus then you have the mortgage payments. And like you said, if there's an issue, the roof caves in, the boiler breaks down, that's a huge expense that all falls on you, because you are the landlord, you own the property. There's nowhere for you to turn a, you know, ostensive, on the first instance, you know, it all falls on you. Whereas, you know, as a renter, you don't necessarily have those additional costs or additional responsibility. So I think, like you said, that probably then favors buying in that instance. Renting in that instance, sorry.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so I think when we were sort of discussing this story, we were sort of thinking, you know, how can we make this as, you know, super as relevant as possible for the BusinesKey podcast? And I think then we started to think about, you know, how do we look at, you know, home buying? You know, is it an asset? Is it a liability? And I think there is sort of like a long-standing argument with regards to this subject. What are your thoughts? Do you think home ownership, would you consider that as an asset, or would you consider that as a liability? Maybe you can explain.
Yeah, so for me, I think a house in general would be an asset. You know, for example, you know, if you were launching a new business, you could use the business as, you can use the house as collateral for the. So collateral, by collateral we mean basically using it so in case the business doesn't do well, then the bank can repossess the house. So effectively the house it's a bit like a bargaining chip in that way. So in some cases you could say it's an asset, but I suppose for most people, I'm not sure, to be honest. There's sort of an argument both ways. I'm not sure. I think most people will probably say it's an asset. But I understand that argument saying it's a liability if, you know, you're not really making any money from it and you're just paying off the mortgage. So yeah, I don't know. I think I'll sit on the fence on that one.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair enough. And I think at different times, I think I've had different schools of thought on the topic. So I definitely can see why, you know, there is the argument and why one can be sort of in the middle on it. But I guess, you know, different ways people have presented it is that, you know, like you said, if you have a home, it's something that you own. I think if you think about, you know, a financial statement, a balance sheet, property typically is classed as a long-term asset, which means that it's not bringing in, you know, short-term or immediate, you know, gains or income, but eventually it will do. I think that's the way that it is looked at, is eventually it will do. And I think for most people and most people's situations, when they've purchased a home, there is a growth in the value of the property over time. So over a period of time, in general, there tends to be what we call capital appreciation. So where the original value of the property that you purchased the property at, in 10 years time or 20 years time, the value in most cases would have increased. So therefore you've generated a gain for yourself to where you had initial investment, you've now made more money from the property. I think the issue with thinking about it in this way is that many people approach purchasing property, there's this term that we often hear about, which is called the property ladder. And I think the way I look at that is a lot of people sort of think, I'll get on the property ladder by purchasing a property. You purchase a property, you're on the ladder. A lot of the times people buy what they can afford, which might be a smaller home. It might be a home that is not as expensive as others. But what happens is over time, you might make more money, you might have more savings. Also, if the value of your current house appreciates, you might be able to leverage that in order to buy a bigger home. So whereas, this whole idea of this long-term asset, you sell your property, you have this gain, you've instead taken this property and you've now used it to purchase a larger property. And with this larger property may come a higher mortgage. It may come with higher expenses. It may come with, the income that you're making from your job or whatever you're doing. You're using that to pay off your mortgage. You're using your income to pay off the expenses from your property. In that way, the property has become a liability because it's not generating money for you. It's taking money away from you. So the money that you make from whatever you're doing, your day job, your side hustle, your own business, is now being siphoned into an expense of your property. However, I think this is not the case where you purchase a home for investment. So if you purchase a home for investment, the idea is you might have tenants that move in, which pay a rental income, and that rental income can then be used to pay off your mortgage. It can also, profits from the rental income can be used to pay off your home where you live if your tenants don't live with you. Also, you can buy a property and you can sell it. And if you sell it for a profit, then you have turned this asset, turned this property into a true asset, and it's generated this money for you. So I definitely, would say that, property is a good asset class. It's a good thing, but it's just one to think about. And particularly in difficult times such as now with the cost of living crisis, it's just a good point to sort of sit and reflect on the costs that are involved, your lifestyle. What is important to you? Is it knowing that you have a place for the long haul? Is it generating money? Is it using your property as collateral for, like you said, a business loan or for a business? What are your aims? And from that should help inform your decision with regards to whether to buy or whether to rent.
Yeah, I think you're raising a great point. It really depends on you've also got to take into account, where the position of the listeners as well, because like you're saying, in terms of how the property might be used. Also, if you think about some people with children, perhaps getting into a good catchment area, is super important, in terms of getting the right school that they would like their children to go to. So yeah, definitely it depends on but that's not to say that one can't rent or buy. I mean, you can rent and still get into a good area, and you can buy and still get into a good area. But it's just to say that actually, you've got to also consider those factors as well when you're thinking about how you're thinking about the property, whether you want to rent or buy. So yeah, very interesting. Yeah. Any other points you want to add?
Did you want to mention the Kiyosaki? Or you don't want to mention it?
Oh, how will I lodge that in?
You could just say there was this author. You don't have to say his name.
Okay. Yeah. There was. No, I can say his name.
Okay.
There was the author. Oh, also another point I just wanted to put out there. There was the author of the book
Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Yeah. Yeah, just another point. There was just another point. There was the author of the book, Rich Dad Poor Dad. Just another point. There was the author of the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, Mr. Kawasaki. I'm not sure if that's his name, Kawasaki or Kiyosaki. Apologies if I've said his name wrong. But yeah, he was saying that, interestingly, that it was a really good book about, certainly recommend it if you haven't read it yet, just about, how to utilize your money to get the best out of your money, and just in terms of mindset of the poor and the rich. But he was talking about how he believes that houses are liabilities. However, he is a landlord, and I said it wrong. There was also just another point I wanted to make was the author of the book. Mm-hmm. It's funny because the first time I said it, I just rolled off the tongue. And this time I'm like,
don't overthink it.
Overthinking it.
You're trying to think of the point that you made.
Yeah.
So don't overthink it. Just roll with it.
Yeah. There was also the author of the.
Another point. Author of the book, Rich Dad Poor Dad.
So another point, there was also an author called Kawasaki. I think his name is Richard Kawasaki. He's the author of Robert Kawasaki.
Yeah.
So just another point. There was also the author, Mr. Richard Kawasaki.
Robert Kawasaki.
bloopers. Yeah. Now I see what's going on.
Coffin! That's it. It's on the recording.
So yeah, there was also there was a book called Rich Dad Poor Dad, and the author. So Rich Dad Poor Dad, if you haven't read it before, so that is like a self-development book. Robert Kiyosaki. I'm not sure I'm saying his name correctly, but anyway, what he was saying was that he considers houses to be liabilities, and he was actually encouraging people to rent houses. Now, the interesting thing is that he's actually a homeowner himself. He owns many properties, and he's a landlord for many properties. So people actually rent to him. So I don't know if he was just trying to encourage people to rent so that he can, cash in, or anyway, I'll leave that to you. But it was, that's how he feels. He feels that it's a liability because it's not bringing in money, is what he said. But perhaps what he meant was if it's just one house, it's a liability.
Exactly right. So perhaps what he was meaning was that, if you do have just one property, which is the home that you live in, he probably would advise against that, because he would deem that as a liability, because it becomes a sort of, an expense for you. Your income, goes into this property, and therefore becomes an outflow of money. It's an expense. But perhaps if you have investment properties, he sees it differently, and it now becomes a source of income. So, but like you said, it's a very interesting topic. There's lots of schools of thought. There arguably isn't one right answer, but as we were saying, it probably just depends on your circumstances and what is right for you. But we'd love to hear your thoughts. We'd love to hear what your opinions are on a topic. So please reach out and let us know.
That's all for today. So this was brought to you by Ochiko and Debbie from the BusinessKey podcast. We'll see you next time.
See you.